It's that strange week between Christmas and New Year's, and we're back for the Steelers Now pregame scout. But yes, the Steelers are back on a Sunday afternoon. They're playing the Seahawks in a game that could very well tip their season one way or the other. Looks like it will, in fact, be the game they have to win if they want to stay in this thing, just like it was last week. I'm Matt Gajtka along with Derrick Bell from Steelers Now. He's our analyst there. Yes, Steelers at Seattle, but we got to talk a little bit about last week because what a difference it was from the 3-game losing streak. And maybe it was, a lot of it was attributable to the quarterback. Mason Rudolph returned to action and improbably led the offense to a big breakout as they almost had their playoff hopes completely dead in the water. And in fact, they might have ended the Bengals' playoff chances with that blowout win at Acrisure Stadium. The Steelers are still a long shot to make the postseason. Let's make that clear as of right now. NFL.com has them at 17%, for instance, but 8-7, a lot better than 7-8. And Derrick, the offense hadn't even scored more than 20 in 5 straight weeks. Then they go out there and they put up 34, their most in more than 2 years. So as far as we're concerned, we get a little variety here. We get to talk about a victory and also a win in which the offense actually carried the load.
Yeah, it was nice to see, the theme of the week just when I was watching it live, but also just when I was watching the tape. It just seems like competency. Like that's really what Mason Rudolph, I felt like, provided the offense. He did a really good job just knowing where to go with the ball, where to go with his eyes post snap. I thought he made good decisions. He only had like really one turnover worthy play, took care of the football, which is obviously big. The Steelers, after that +3 turnover differential last week, I believe they're back in the NFL lead or tied for the lead in turnover differential. So if you just look at the wins and losses of how the Steelers have come away from matchups with wins, it's been when they won the turnover battle. So they did a good job. Obviously getting the ball to George Pickens definitely helps. 14 went off for 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. He played spectacular football, but was really impressed with the performance from Rudolph. Granted, with the caveat that we talked about last week, this is a bad Bengals defense. Kenny Pickett had probably his best game of his career just a couple weeks ago against the same defense. So, this defense that they're going to see with Seattle, a little bit better, in my opinion, just across the board, even though, they've still got some exploitable areas there as well. But I'm excited to see, if he can build off that performance, string 2 of these together in a row.
Yeah, let's break down what the Steelers might be able to carry over into Seattle. And by the way, the Seahawks can essentially lock up a playoff berth with a win. Not totally, but they can get their playoff percentage up around 90% if they win. So they'll have plenty on the line as well. They're favored by 3.5 at home as of Friday afternoon, and the over-under is 41. So the bookmakers think we're looking at another low-scoring showdown here. But as for last week and what it might portend for this week, yeah, Mason Rudolph, he's number one story, obviously, following a 124 passer rating. That was the best for a Steelers QB in 5 years. Passer rating, just one of many metrics that we can use to determine efficiency, of course, but it was pretty much night and day, especially in contrast to what we've seen earlier this year from both Mitch Trubisky recently and Kenny Pickett over the first, 12 games of the season. Did you think any part of it was predictable beforehand? You mentioned the Bengals defense, not exactly a shining example of point prevention, but at the same time, it felt more like, let's just throw this at the wall and see what happens for me.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about it on the preview, if I remember correctly, but just the Bengals defense, really susceptible to giving up big plays. Safety play has been a issue for them over the course of the season. Losing Jesse Bates, Von Bell in free agency, they've got some young guys playing back there that are still kind of finding their footing. I mean, you saw a good example of that when I mentioned Rudolph having his eyes in the right place. Just simple things like hitting that slant on the first pass of the game, just like knowing where to go. They got middle field closed. So against, cover 3, you really want to work that slant flat combo. He hits Pickens in stride. But if you watch the safety, he takes a terrible angle. And that's the difference in having, a second year guy who's barely played and having a guy like Jesse Bates, who's been arguably the best safety in the league this year. So those interchangeable pieces on the back end with Cincinnati secondary has really caused them issues over the season. So I am surprised that Rudolph played as well as he did, even though I don't think it was like some just fantastic record-breaking performance, but he played well. And just for his first performance, first start in 2 years, I thought that was definitely notable. So I just think, again, just knowing where to go with the football. And I thought that there were definitely some encouraging times too of Rudolph showing some improvement in terms of dealing with pressure, like not getting to his check down on time and just not seeming as frazzled with his feet when there was pressure in his face. But again, it's 1 week. We're going to see if he can continue it on against the Seahawks. I'm excited for him to get another opportunity to show what he can do.
Is there one thing, one aspect of the game that Rudolph does better than the Steelers' other two quarterbacks?
I think just against the Bengals, I just think a little bit more of like playing on time. What I mean
Mhm.
by that is just, Trubisky in general is he's just a guy that doesn't really like to play within structure like very often. I mean, he's just
Mhm.
very chaotic in the pocket. He wants to scramble, do different things. Pickett can be like that in some regards, but I actually think that Kenny's been a little bit more willing this year to play within structure. There's just been things in his game that have been preventing him from really being successful at it. But I just think with Mason, the biggest thing that I took away from him, he just knew where to go with the football, like confirming stuff post snap, making the right reads. And I think that you saw just some of the easy plays, like I mentioned with that slant. Like it's just a slant, but those are the plays that have been missing in the offense. Like if you think about like all the weeks just leading up to the Bengals game, how many end breakers have we seen the quarterbacks just sail due to bad footwork, due to just misses, high, low, whatsoever? Those are the plays that just they haven't been made consistently over the course of the season. So just them making those simple plays, it makes all the difference. And you give the chance to get your best playmaker the football, and good things typically happen.
There's been a lot of talk this year. You've talked a lot about this over the course of the season, how it doesn't seem we have the ceiling of extremely talented passers in the NFL. But might you also say that, say, going to your third string guy with Rudolph, it's been the year of the backup quarterback across the NFL. A lot of these guys are looking at least competent. Maybe the floor is a little bit higher, but the ceiling is lower. Does that make any sense for you as far as like the entire quarterback talent pool in the NFL right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think really the thing that kind of sticks out to me is, I think as time has moved on, I do feel like the backup quarterback position has been able to kind of acclimate themselves quicker in today's game. But I also think, one of the things that I think we get caught up in, and like from a fan perspective, is just that instant gratification. I feel like that a backup often provides. So when the backup comes in and plays really well, it lifts the spirits of the fan base. Like you can just feel it, like on social media right now. Like the Steelers fan base, the mood is completely different than what it had been previously. But I also think that, what we saw from Jake Browning last week is a good example of why it's important not to get too high or too low with backups. Like you almost have to grade them on a curve, because typically the NFL, man, it's a really cruel business. It's a really cruel game, and it will humble you very quickly. And there's a reason that these guys are backups. The more tape that you put out there, the more exposure that defensive coordinators have on you, and those guys get paid too. So Seattle's going to have a good game plan. I'm sure now that they've got a little bit of exposure to Rudolph. I'm excited to see what tweaks the Steelers make in the offense this week to kind of keep them off balance.
Mhm. Okay, let's move on to the other guy who had a huge game last week, pardon me, on the offensive side of the ball, George Pickens. We were just talking last week, 7 days ago, about is George Pickens really worth it? Does he have the high end ceiling, to borrow a term from the previous topic here, to tolerate a lot of the stuff that's going on, the attitude, the mysterious quotes, the just basically hanging his teammates out to dry at times as well on the field, which for me is the most troublesome part of it. But then he comes out, and of course, with great service from Rudolph, he puts forth his best game as an NFL player. As you put it in your recap of what went down, it was a Moss-like performance, and it really was, with some of the huge catches. He had 3 receptions of over 50 yards. That's believed to be the first time in Steelers history that's ever happened, which I guess not surprising, but still really puts it in perspective how good and how explosive both he and Rudolph were in that combination last week. But as far as Pickens goes, did you see anything different in his game, or was it more the Bengals didn't really respect him with the coverages they were throwing out there?
Yeah, it was a little bit of everything. You know, we talked last week about Pickens, just some of the immaturity stuff that was kind of circulating. Obviously, he was, king of the headlines heading into the Bengals game. And, I feel pretty good about, how our conversation about, that situation was being handled and some of the things that were being said. I think really it's just opportunity, man. Like, I love the response from a young player, somebody that had, dealt with a lot just in the media over the course of the days leading up to the game, but come out and have a put on a performance like that was really special. I was surprised a little bit. I will say the last touchdown, I think it's 24-8, and Anarumo decided he was gonna go press man with single high safety in the middle of the field. I was very surprised that they did that after what Pickens had done throughout the game, just in terms of winning vertically, winning all over the field. So whenever those looks present themselves, you almost have to take advantage. And like, that's the thing that I liked about what Rudolph did. He gave him opportunities to make plays down the field. Anytime the Steelers face man coverage or any type of single high, I feel really confident with the guys they got on the outside. George Pickens, I think he's an incredible talent. I think he really has the talent to be one of the 5-10 best players at his position in the league, even, soon-ish in the next couple of years. And I still trust Deontay Johnson to get open anytime he's one-on-one. It's really just about the opportunity. This offense has been really stagnant. There's problems with the scheme. There's problems in pass protection. There's problem with the quarterback play. Like I, hit on Twitter last week, I think we brought it up in the pregame too. Like, this offense does not lack weapons. I think that people are confusing the production from the weapons with the talent from the weapons. The weapons are talented enough, 100%. In my belief, it's just about the opportunities, and hopefully those guys continue to get those as the season kind of concludes here.
It really does tell you how crucial it is for other players to do their job for wide receivers to shine, right? Because it takes a while to get the ball out there, especially if you're trying to get plays downfield. You got to have blocking. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. But overall, quarterback play, everyone knows it's essential. But again, this tells you exactly how essential. And I guess it does bring to light for me how frustrating it must be as a receiver. You're good at what you do, but you're just not getting the opportunities because somewhere down the chain, someone's not doing their job, or the opponent is finding a way to shut you down. So I think a lot of times we go overboard with the whole wide receiver as diva narrative, because look, so much of it is out of their control, isn't it, with how well they do?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult unless you're somebody that just enjoys like diving into the film every week and you're watching each individual player. It's really difficult to understand the performance of a specific player in a team sport like this. There's 11 guys on the field, and like when you're at the receiver position, which is directly impacted by how the quarterback's playing, it's really difficult. Like, because we talk about the stats of it, right? Like, a lot of receivers are, you mentioned the diva term and everything like that. Everybody wants to put up big numbers. But like I said, the production aspect of it really depends on the quarterback getting you the ball. I mean, that just is the sport. That is the game. But, like I said, the Steelers in a really good spot with the weapons that they got on offense. They got a lot of stuff that they're going to have to hammer out in the offseason. We'll see how, 2023 concludes here, if they're able to make the playoffs, make a push, whatever. But they've got some stuff to figure out on offense. I really don't have a lot of concerns about like the weaponry. I think they've got two talented backs. I think they've got multiple good receivers. If they can figure out, Freiermuth getting to play a little bit more consistent, reintegrate him back into the offense, and then find some type of slot receiver in the offseason. I think this is a really ready-made set group for whoever's going to be, whatever the quarterback situation is next year. I feel really confident with that kind of environment or ecosystem for that player to work with.
And this all, I think, goes back to why a lot of us were so frustrated with the coaching, because we felt like that the talent was there, just the production was not. So bridging that gap, right? It's part coaching and it's part execution on the part of guys across the roster. All right, moving on to third down. And you killed the Steelers, rightfully so, for their trench warfare or lack thereof against the Colts in the final game of that losing streak. It really was, I would say, embarrassing, not even borderline embarrassing. It was embarrassing for the Steelers to get pushed around as they did. And it's not like they had a huge rushing performance. Najee Harris, though, did have a very productive game. We saw some moments and a big block, in fact, on the Calvin Austin touchdown from Jaylen Warren. And also defensively, Yeah, the Steelers got after Joe Mixon and company. There was really no rushing attack for the Bengals as well. So that was a pretty big turnaround, wasn't it, from the previous week?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the disparity in terms of the rushing games. You look at like the way that the Steelers ran the ball compared to the way the Bengals ran the ball. The Bengals 31% success rate, the Steelers were at 45. I mean, that's a huge difference, especially like not even just comparing the two run games, but you got to think about it. Both teams are playing backup quarterbacks. Like you're not trying to put too much on their shoulders, and that was one of the nice things. I felt like really from the jump, the Steelers were creating good rushing lanes for Najee and getting some push, allowing them to stay on schedule. They weren't in too many third and longs to where, the pass rushers of the Bengals, Trey Hendrickson, was able to really just like tee off on him in those obvious situations. You want to try to avoid those as much as possible. And I felt like the running game allowed them to stay on schedule, and that was a good thing. And then on the flip side of that, I really felt like the Steelers defensive line did an excellent job just holding up the point of attack, beating blocks with quickness, standing, the Bengals heavy gap team like to run a lot of duo that requires you to be physical up front, win those gaps at the line of scrimmage, and then just shutting Mixon down. They've done that twice this year. Really impressive. Mixon's a powerful back. He's AFC North built. I know Tomlin always compliments, his physicality, but just like shutting him down and making the Bengals one-dimensional. I mean, that's really the Steelers' MO on defense, right? Like you win the early downs, you win first, second down, get teams in the third and long, and then like if teams want to be brave enough to go deep drop back passing game, you have two really good edge rushers that are going to win their matchup more often than not. So that's kind of just the formula. And I felt like that was how they were able to kind of force Browning into some bad decisions too, just getting him backed up into less advantageous situations.
Was it mostly matchup dependent, or do you feel like that they can carry that over? It's going to be tougher on the road, obviously, against Seattle as we kind of transition into what we're going to look at this week. And like I mentioned, the Seahawks are not going to be lacking any motivation. It's just like last week, really, kind of a loser leaves town match again for the third consecutive week. Do you feel like that type of success is sustainable against a different Seahawks outfit?
Yeah, I mean, just like even looking at the Seahawks from an offensive perspective when the Steelers are on defense, right? Like the Seahawks rushing game isn't like the most efficient thing of all time. Like if you've ever watched Kenneth Walker, who's dealing with an injury right now, he's dealing with an injured shoulder. If you've ever watched him run, he's a very boomer bust runner. Like he bounces stuff to the outside when he doesn't need to. Like he's a guy who is searching desperately for the big play. So even there are times where they will get themselves into second down and long, third down and long, those types of situations. Geno has really struggled this season because in those situations where he's been heavily pressured. They've dealt with some injuries on the offensive line standpoint. So I think the Steelers do have a talent advantage on the interior for sure, just in terms of like Seattle center guard situation. I like Keanu Benton in this matchup a lot. And then the Steelers edge rushers. I mean, those guys get paid a lot of money. Like you're going to put your faith in them regardless of how talented the young tackles of the Seahawks are. Charles Cross, Abe Lucas. Those guys are really good players. But one thing about Seattle that I think that is definitely noteworthy. Seattle, even when they get in those third and long situations, they don't like to get help on the edge. Like they like to get five guys out in the pass protection or out in the route. So that's kind of a old like Shanahan McVay thing. They really like to get five guys out in the pattern. And if you're doing that, you're going to tell your tackles like, hey, you're one-on-one. And if they're willing to go one-on-one on TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, those guys have to dominate. And I expect them to if that is the case.
Yeah, so one interesting aspect of the matchup. Let's continue that look at the Seahawks. They've been in the shadow of the Niners all year, and rightfully so. San Francisco has been excellent, but the Seahawks have creeped up. They had a losing streak. Now they're on a winning streak. They've gotten back-to-back tight wins over Philly at home and Tennessee last week on the road, a last-minute victory, in fact. And now they're inside the NFC playoff field. They would be in the postseason if the season ended today. The obvious cliche being the season doesn't end today, but they have done good work to get to where they are. And for me, just from the 10,000-foot view, Derek, the obvious matchup concern is DK Metcalf. The guy's an absolute beast week in, week out. Just watch the highlight tapes, and you can see him all over it. Fantastic one-handed touchdown catch last week to help get the Seahawks within striking distance of the Titans there on the road. We know that Joey Porter Jr. is excited about facing off against DK Metcalf, but it's also a team effort, right? And shutting down a guy like that, is the Steelers' secondary going to be up to the task there?
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to see what happens with that, right? Like the Steelers' game plan last week against the Bengals was completely different than what we're accustomed to. They played the second highest rate of zone coverage that they had
Mm.
all season. The only time they played less man coverage was week 2, I think, against the Browns. So a lot of zone coverage last week, but we still saw Joey Porter Jr. follow T. Higgins around. I anticipate that's going to be the same thing this week with Metcalf. Metcalf's a really interesting player. Obviously, you just look at the dude. He's like a Greek god. He's like, what, 6'4", 6'3", like 235. He's built like very few NFL receivers have ever been built like. Height, weight, speed, freak. Loves to win vertically, go routes, slants, digs. They run some like deep out patterns with him. He's an absolute monster. Like one of the things I think with DK in terms of like slowing him down is you have to get your hands on him. You have to play physical with him. It sounds like counterintuitive with a physical receiver, like a bigger guy like that. But if you just play off or you play soft and you don't get hands on him, he's got one of those guys that just builds up speed very quickly, and he's just going to run right by you. So I think for Porter, this is a matchup where, like, you look at it from the Steelers' perspective. This is why they went out and got him. Like, you want to play man coverage, you want to play single high, especially on passing downs, be aggressive in the secondary. You went out and got Joey Porter Jr. for stuff like this. You put that guy at the line of scrimmage and let him take his lumps, or let him win his reps. Like, let's just see what he's about. So just based on how Porter's played, like some of the best receivers in the league this season, yeah, there's been some penalties. I think he leads the league right now, or tied for the league lead in penalties. But he's won the vast majority of the reps that he's came across. Film's very good. The numbers are very good. I'm excited about this matchup and just to kind of see how it unfolds, because it's going to be like a heavyweight fight.
Just looking at the Seahawks schedule, in fact, it might be a team that is better than its record indicates. They have a couple of losses to the Niners. Who doesn't have a loss or two to the Niners, it seems like, this year? They fell in a close one to the Cowboys on the road in that matchup. They lost twice to the Rams. I guess that's kind of mysterious. Both teams are fighting for the playoffs, both at 8-7 right there. And like I mentioned, they just took down the Eagles at home. And the win against the Titans, of course, puts them in this position where if they win out, they're definitely in. Geno Smith, the quarterback for Seattle, he has had an interesting route through his pro career. Had some failures early. Fresh start in Seattle, seems to have done pretty well for him a couple of seasons into his tenure with Pete Carroll. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of his game, and what the Seahawks are trying to do in general on offense?
Yeah, no, Geno, man, I said this last year, but Geno was one of the biggest surprises, of course, league wide, but especially to me. Like, I did not think he had this level of play to him. I kept waiting for him to kind of come down, and some of the numbers and advanced numbers did come down the second half of the season. And this year it's been more. He's been a solid starter. He's about league average in terms of like the important metrics. But like I mentioned, they've had some pass protection issues that have been some severe pass protection issues that he's had to deal with. With Geno is really just about one of the most confident passers in the NFL today. Like, I don't even understand. Like, he does have a good arm, but he's one of those guys that absolutely believes with 100% certainty that he can make any throw. Like, it doesn't matter what it is, what the coverage looks like. He thinks he can fit the ball in there. Very aggressive passer, smart, a really smart, intelligent quarterback, just in terms of reading the defense pre-snap, confirming post-snap, knowing where his eyes need to be. And he's a risk taker. He's a calculated risk taker. Sometimes I feel like his aggressiveness can get him in trouble. Like, you can get him into some turnover-worthy plays here and there. Early in his career, like the big thing with Geno when he was, starting his career with the Jets, he took a lot of sacks. And you can still sometimes see him fall back into some bad habits in terms of how he will take, or I will say, like, not just give up on plays. But he's gotten better in terms of like maneuvering the pocket, navigating pressure. He's a dude, no matter what, like, you can get him down early in the game. You can pick on him. You can pick him off. It doesn't matter. Fourth quarter comes around, he's still swinging. So, like, they need to expect, the Steelers need to expect they're going to get 60 minutes of like him swinging hard, and he's going to hit some home runs, man. Like, you look at talking about him and DK, similar defense, just in terms of how they want to play the pass against Dallas. You go back and watch some of the best throws that Geno made that day. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's like his highlight reel is up there with any quarterback in the league. And, DK went off. He's like 6 catches, like 135 yards, 3 touchdowns. The reason that's relevant is because Dallas, like, tops in the league in terms of man coverage rate. The Steelers right there with them. So like there's going to be opportunities in terms of, Geno being able to pick his spots, take his shots. The Steelers are going to have to be up for that. Joey Porter Jr. going to get tested. It's going to be interesting to see, safeties, getting this new look group with Rowe and Peterson. Got to keep stuff in front of him because he loves to throw the deep ball.
And this is not the Legion of Boom anymore in Seattle. Obviously, we're several years past that peak for the defense. But what's the strength of Seattle's defending group this year?
Yeah, they're better defending the pass than they are the run. They've got some guys in the secondary that I really like. They brought over Julian Love, Quandre Diggs, a really good post safety. Tariq Woolen had a really good rookie year. He was a guy that I was really unsure of what to do with last draft process, just because technique was all over the place, but he went to perfect situation. Seattle's always found a way to get those guys up to speed really quickly in the secondary. At the linebacker spot, we're going to see some Devin Bush. They play a little big nickel. So whenever teams go like 12 personnel, they match with like a big nickel. Usually that spot's filled by Jamal Adams, but it doesn't sound like he's going to play. So he's played there a little bit. Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks. Jordan Brooks has been injured, but he returned to practice on Friday. That's big for them. I think Brooks is he's a guy, when he came into the league, I thought he was overdrafted, and now I think he's underrated. Way better in coverage than I ever would have anticipated coming out of Texas Tech. Their pass rush unit, it's shaky a little bit, very inconsistent. They got some young guys that are trying to find their way. Mafe, really athletic dude. Derek Hall, rookie. He's playing at a solid level. But just overall, the way that you kind of get after this Seahawks unit is just running the football. Like they really struggle to defend the run. And it really depends. Like it's kind of one of those things where Seattle's caught in a catch-22 because they have to play guys like Bobby Wagner, because he's one of their better run defenders. He's an excellent tackler still. But like guys like Wagner and Jamal Adams at this stage of their careers are just black holes in coverage. So like you can exploit them in coverage. So whenever those guys are on the field, you can attack them. I noted it in my Steelers Now matchups article. This would be the week, if there was ever a week to like actually design some routes, some angle routes, some stuff to the flat for like Jaylen Warren. This is the week to do it because Wagner can be slow to diagnose route concepts, and he's just not the athlete that he was, 5-6 years ago during the Legion of Boom era. So going to be a really interesting matchup. I think the Steelers can put some points on the board provided, Rudolph plays the way that he played last week.
All right, so here's the question. Do you buy what the bookmakers are selling this week? Seattle by 3.5, and like I mentioned, over-under just at 41 for Steelers Seahawks as we're down to week number 17.
Man, I'm telling you, this year has been the hardest year to predict Steelers games in quite some time, man. Like I feel like previous years, I feel like you could know if they're going to win, if it's going to be close, whatever. My biggest prediction is that I think that this game's going to be really close one way. Like I don't see Seattle just blowing the brakes off of them. And I definitely don't see the Steelers do what they did last week, which is just demolish the Bengals. This is a really close matchup. I think the spread indicates that 3.5 points, right? Seattle's at home. I think if the Steelers are going to win the game, I don't want to make a prediction because I feel like I've been wrong the last couple of weeks. And I feel like if I pick them to win, they'll end up losing, and I don't want people to be mad at us in the comments. If the Steelers are going to win, I think the edge rushers have a huge game, and they sack Geno like 3-4 times, and then he throws an interception or two, and that's the formula to winning. It sounds really cliche, but that's really the way that you get after this Seahawks team. Like I said, they're terrible in the red zone, so if you can force them to field goals, that's a good thing. If you can get after Geno, continue to pressure him, he's going to take some shots down the field, but you just got to rattle him and get him on the ground as much as possible. And then on offense, I think they have to run the ball efficiently, and they have to take their shots when they can. Seattle's done a decent job keeping the lid on stuff. Like I said, they got a really good post safety in Quandre Diggs. But you can still move the ball on them. One thing to also note about the Seattle corners, particularly Woolen, he's an awful tackler. So you can get him in space, and if you can like design some plays to get the ball in the playmaker's hands, maybe Deontay Johnson, maybe a guy like Calvin Austin, even George Pickens, there are yards to be made after the catch. If you can either run his way or throw quickly to his way, because he's a guy that doesn't like tackle.
Okay. So some insight from Derrick Bell. He's got his usual SN Plus stuff up on Steelers Now steelersnow.com. Follow us on social media, PGH Steelers Now, on all your relevant platforms. And just a side note, I'd like some personal vengeance against Geno Smith. His Mountaineers came into my Thundering Herds home field about 12 years ago and authored a huge comeback. We were up like 21-3 against West Virginia. That's the last time that Marshall's played WVU, and Geno Smith led that comeback. So I've always had that that taste for revenge against Smith. So we'll see if it happens this week. Let's see if Mason Rudolph can outplay him. It's been such a weird season, hasn't it, Derek? We're talking about Mason Rudolph, the savior, here in the final 3 weeks. I guess, hey, they always make it interesting, right? That's the one thing you can say about the Steelers. And for all the complaints about Mike Tomlin, again, here we are at the end of the season. The team's got a shot.
Yeah, it's been such a weird season, man. Like the weirdest that I can ever remember. Not even necessarily like good or bad, just like you said, weird. Hard to predict. I definitely never would have predicted that we were in week 17 here and in a do or die matchup where Mason Rudolph's responsible for keeping the Steelers playoff hopes alive. But that's where we're at. Hopefully they're able to come out with a W. It's gonna be, like I said, it's gonna be a nasty game. One of the things that I really hope does not happen, and this is just from an old, like, growing up a Steelers fan and me having, like, I think it was the 2015 or 2016 season. I guess 2015 because they play every 4 years. The officiating Seattle, man, don't be expecting any calls. It's a different place to play. Like, they're going to let their DBs hold. I still vividly remember Richard Sherman practically mugging Antonio Brown that entire game, and he didn't get a single call. So don't be expecting any calls. There's gonna be a lot of people complaining about the refs on Sunday on my Twitter sphere.
Yeah, well, hey, credit to the Seattle fans, right? It's Lumen Field now, but whatever the field's been called, they've made it
For sure.
a real hellscape for the opposition. And yeah, like you said, that bleeds over to the officiating, right? That's been proven. That's the biggest effect on officiating is a crowd. They subconsciously it sneaks in, no matter how professional or how good you are at your job as a referee or as an official. So yeah, don't expect that. That's part of the reason why it's just going to be a little bit tougher inherently this week to pull off another win. But the Steelers do have some hope from last week, and that's where they're working as we go into the final 2 games of the season. All right, for Derrick Bell, again, check out his work at SteelersNow.com. He also has his own YouTube page. I'm Matt Gajtka saying goodbye. We'll talk to you next week for the finale. Until then, enjoy the football and happy early New Year.